What is up, class? It's Robert Marose, and I'm here to do my presentation on routine activities theory. This is my cover page, routine activities theory, Robert Marose, Professor Loke. Table, excuse me. Table of contents, just a little what we're going to go over today. So, development of theory, what are routine activities, situational model. We're going to go over the three components of a situational model: motivated offenders, targets, guardians. And then we're going to go over a couple studies, their findings, and background and hypothesis. We're going to also go over the issues with the studies, their contribution to routine activities theory, future research, how we can combat crimes in the future, conclusion, and the citations. So, development of routine activities theory. Routine activities theory is a subsidiary of rational choice theory, which holds that individuals freely choose their behavior and are motivated by the avoidance of pain and pursuit of pleasure. The theorists behind this are Marcus Felston and Lawrence Cohen, and it was developed in 1979. It differs from most theories, which is pretty cool in that it looks at crime as a singular event, whereas most theories look at the criminal's background, biological, psychological, as well as social factors that cause the crime to commit such acts. Routine activities refer to how people live everyday lives, including their work, free time, education, how they take care of their families, walking the dog, going to the store, and how change in this can cause a crime to occur. The lifestyle of a person plays an important part in routine activities theory. An individual who's more exposed to criminal behavior in their lifestyle means that there's a higher chance that they will decide to commit a crime. It's also worth noting an individual who is more exposed to criminal behavior in their lifestyle also has higher chances of running into motivated offenders, making themselves appear susceptible, as well as a lack of capable guardians to prevent a crime, meaning that those more exposed to it are more likely to be victims of crime also. Situational model. Routine activities theory situational model has three components: a motivated offender, a susceptible target, lack of capable guardianship. When these three converge, crime is most likely to occur. So a motivated offender, a person who is pursuing their happiness and avoiding pain and has no other legitimate means to do so other than crime. A susceptible target is a person who appears vulnerable to the motivated offender. Capable guardianship consists of people who can prevent the crime, as well as surveillance systems that can also prevent the crime. So if we have deterred criminals, a lack of targets, as well as capable guardians present, then it will be less likely for a potential crime is to be committed, as well as this also works the other way. If we have motivated criminals, an influx of susceptible targets, as well as a lack of capable guardians, then crime is most likely to take place. Motivated offenders are people who look for susceptible targets as a way to fill their needs. The number of motivated criminals in the population affects crime levels. The more motivated offenders, the more likely crime is to occur, as well as vice versa, where if there's less motivated offenders, less likely crimes to occur. They're less likely to commit these crimes if they can achieve their goals through legitimate means. Motivation can be reduced with alternatives such as jobs or leisure activities that may appear present. Susceptible targets, pretty simple. It's perceived vulnerability to the offender, making the target look suitable and easily accessible. Offenders look for people who are alone, no guardians around, and people who appear to be vulnerable. Guardians, people capable of preventing the crime and deterring an individual from offending. Guardians can range from a person who can prevent the crime as well as video surveillance security systems. The presence of these guardians make vulnerable targets appear non-susceptible, therefore it decreases the chances of offending and can also make a motivated criminal rethink committing the crime due to the fact that there's a chance it's prevented. Study A was a 2009 telephone survey of rural adults in order to test how routine activities works in burglary victimization in a rural area. The way it went was response were measured the time away spent from home. This represented a lack of capable guardians, the people who live in the homes, to prevent the crime, as well as making the homes potential targets, meaning the homeowners are not there, so the houses appear vulnerable. The presence for motivated offenders in this was taken from each rural county's residents in poverty, representing the people in poverty have no other legitimate means to pursue happiness and avoid pain, therefore they have the motivations to commit crimes. The hypotheses tested were an increased level of guardianship will result in a decrease in victimization, decreased levels of target suitability will result in a decrease in the likelihood of victimization, and increased prevalence of motivated offenders will result in an increased crime rate. The findings: 5 variables were tested: alarm systems, installed extra locks, people who locked their home, guard dog, extra lighting outside. However, it was actually found that those with extra locks were actually found to be at a higher risk of burglary. However, this may have something to do with the fact that victims of burglary tend to increase their security measures by installing extra locks. Support was found for the concept of motivated offenders, with victims in poverty representing motivated offenders. The results reveal that respondents were 28 times more likely to be a victim of burglary when they live in a county with a higher level of poverty. Conclusion: it was predicted during the study that the number of adults residing in each home will result in a lower likelihood for burglary victimization. However, this did not prove enough statistical evidence. It also found that individuals who were involved in a neighborhood watch were also not found to be less likely victims of burglary. Second part: the lack of power of guardianship fails to provide support for the guardianship component of Cohen and Felson's routine activities theory. That includes the variables acting as guardians, and which did not prove support. Study B was the influence of family and peers on violent victimization. It involves suggesting that family and peers can be used in determining individuals' differences in violence victimization. Therefore, it used the National Longitude Study of Adolescent Health in order to find whether peer and family variables do correspond with a higher risk of victimization. The hypotheses tested were an increased level of guardianship will result in a decrease in victimization, decreased levels of target suitability will result in a decrease in the likelihood of victimization, and increased prevalence of motivated offenders will result in an increased crime rate. Findings: closely knit families allow for less opportunity to be exposed to a motivated offender. So that being said, when your family's present, you're close to them, that's the presence of guardians who make possible targets appear less susceptible. However, it was found that those teens who had exposure to delinquent peers were more suitable targets. So, for example, if your child's hanging out with delinquent peers, they appear more vulnerable targets as they're more exposed to criminal lifestyle. However, it was worth noting that close-knit families do counteract this, and that those still in close-knit families tend to shy away from criminal behavior as well as criminal victimization. Conclusion: close-knit families provide great protection for children because they increase the presence of guardians. Next study was study C, simulation for theory and testing and experimentation, an example using routine activity theory and street robbery. The study suggests that the longer an individual is away from home, the more likely there is for a street robbery to occur. It uses simulated robberies with different experimental conditions to test this hypothesis. The study uses descriptive statistics as a way to examine the spatial distribution of street robberies, where those who spend more time away from home go to different street intersections that have a higher density of people and crime. So basically, this is saying the longer you spend away from home, the more likely you are to converge into motivated offenders and make yourself appear susceptible. Some hypotheses tested: the average time spent by civilians away from home increases, the rate of street robbery will increase. Second was the average time spent away by civilians on activities away from home, the spatial pattern of street robberies will change. So you see findings. Findings: as the time away from home increases, the number of convergence increases, followed by robberies prevented by police. So that being said, the longer you spend away from home, the higher convergence increases, then the higher rate of robberies increases. The model found that at 30% time away from home, areas of concentration appear, leaving less convergence for an individual. However, as more time is spent away from home, the densities of those original concentrations increases while new areas of higher density appear. That being said, the longer you spend away from home, the more intersections you converge to, the more likely you are to be a victim of crime. So increased convergence is increased frequency of convergence of elements necessary for a crime to occur. Conclusion: the results of the study show that the longer an individual spends away from home, the more likely to converge with other individuals, therefore increasing the chances of being a victim of a street robbery. Some issues found with the study. Study A found it was using county level data, therefore it's hard to say that poverty levels in each of individuals' neighborhood has to do with the crime rate. Study B, it was a countrywide study, therefore it doesn't keep in mind to specific areas to determine the amount of motivated offenders in the area. It was also a self-reported sample, therefore there is a possibility of inconsistent data and not honest answers. Study C. Some issues with study C that I found with is that some areas that you converge to have higher rates of poverty, therefore an increase of motivated offenders. Also, I think there's room for error based on the fact that the process was repeated numerous times with the same factors. So I think that's worth noting. How do these studies contribute to routine activities theory? I feel that the first study discovered that those living in higher poverty areas were more likely to be victims of burglaries due to increased motivation from offenders. So those in poverty tend to be more around motivated criminals who need to pursue happiness and avoid pain through non-legitimate means. The second study shows how the presence of capable guardians helps deter criminals, such as close-knit families. And the third study talks about an individual's time away from home and how the increase in convergence is more likely for an offense to occur in a poverty-stricken area. Some future research. I feel the best research to conduct in this field would be to study both rich and poverty-stricken areas and look at the crime rates of each. I would study mostly robberies, grand theft auto, and home invasions. I think that poverty-stricken areas will clearly have more crime as opposed to rich ones due to the lack of legitimate means in order to achieve one's happiness. I'm really intrigued as to what we can find as far as increasing guardianship in this poverty-stricken area to see if we can reduce crime. It is also worth noting a second study should be done in low-income areas who recently had an increase in job employment and determine whether crime has diminished. Therefore, we're able to see the link between higher employment rate and how it affects crime levels. My hypothesis for these are in poverty-stricken areas, crime is likely to decrease with more guardians present. In low-income areas, when the job employment rate goes up, the crime rate goes down. How can we combat crime using routine activities theory? I think we have implemented a program that monitors low-income communities. Although it's expensive and costly, then maybe we'll be able to help deter criminals, maybe by using a community group that uses community service hours as payment. I also think creating more jobs would help potential offenders go through legitimate means rather than criminal means. However, it's easier said than done for us to create an influx of jobs. Conclusion wrap-up. The main points of routine activities theory are the convergence of motivated offenders, susceptible victims, and the lack of guardians to prevent the crime from occurring. Although some of the research doesn't validate all 3 points, each part of the research validates at least one part of routine activities theory. I think the true issue lies within a large amount of motivated offenders. Excuse me, the hiccups. The true issue lies within a large amount of motivated offenders who have no other means to achieve their means without committing crime. And these are my citations. So thank you again for the time. I hope you enjoyed the video. It's been a great class. Everyone take care.